Hello everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. This video is going to be the second part of my previously filmed book haul in which I talked about new releases and library books that I had acquired recently. This one is going to be the used books that I acquired recently. So some of these come from used bookstores, some of them come from sellers on Amazon. Let's go ahead and get into it. And by the way, extra points if you notice a theme running here. So let's start out with two books by the same author. I have Tangleweed and Brine by Deirdre Sullivan and also Needlework by Deirdre Sullivan. I bought these used after seeing them both recommended on Jean's channel. This one I think I'm going to be reading for the Femme Fatale readathon, and then I also wanted to just buy something else cheap to give me free shipping, so I ended up buying her contemporary novel about tattoos, as well as her fairy tale retellings. This is the other one that I bought used online. That's Shylock's Daughter by Miriam Pressler. I guess I'm like on a kick of Shakespeare retellings again. Usually that's pretty typical for me, but it comes in phases. Obviously, this is an allusion to his play The Merchant of Venice, and we know that Shylock has like a mysterious woman figure in the play that is mentioned but not really explored very deeply. So I'm hoping maybe this is like a retelling of who that person was. Then I went to a local used bookstore and I ended up just picking up a whole ton of stuff. This is where you might notice the theme. So the first one that I picked up was called The Jew in the Medieval World, a source book from 315 to 1791 by Jacob R. Marcus. This is a subject, really, that I was getting really interested in after reading a bunch of fiction about the Middle Ages or that was written in the Middle Ages, because the subject of Jews does come up a lot in those books, but I am actually curious to go see like some of the primary sources that talk about like Jewish life in the Middle Ages, because I don't really know any of them and I would like to learn. Okay, I picked a couple of these up because I am doing a bunch of folklore and mythology readings. I picked up a book of Yiddish folk tales and an anthology of Jewish storytelling because for the Myth Take Readathon, I am reading a few books that are retellings of Jewish and Eastern European myths and legends, and I really wanted to familiarize myself more with those, so I picked these up. Okay, I also picked up this book, which is called Chagall Burning Lights. That is I guess sort of like a memoir by Bella Chagall, who's the wife of Marc Chagall, my favorite contemporary artist, and it is illustrated by her husband. So it's the story of where they grew up in White Russia before the revolution and what happened to them after, as artistic careers and their move to Paris began to take off. And I was just intrigued because it's a memoir about one of my favorite artists, so I thought that that would be really cool to read. Okay, I have a couple other medieval related books that just jumped off the shelf at me. I have The Art of Courtly Love by Andreas Capellanus and Magic in the Middle Ages by Richard Kiechiffer. These don't seem like they're particularly related to each other than the time period, but these are both things that I am really interested in. The Courtly Love book is primarily because of the Orlando Furioso buddy read that I was doing with Fariba over at the Medieval Reader, and the Magic in the Middle Ages because I'm interested in like the history of magic, folklore, religion, etc., and I thought that that kind of thing would be interesting to read about. My final nonfiction book is a book that I've been wanting to own for some time but never got around to purchasing, and that's SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard. Mary Beard is a scholar and also a public intellectual about the like classical world in terms of mythology, archaeology, etc., and this is her book that is about the history of Rome. I think that I'm probably going to be familiar with the broad strokes of this book because I double majored in classical studies in college, but I still think that there's always something new that can be learned from reading books about a topic that's familiar to you, especially when it comes from a writer that's as amazing as Mary Beard. Seriously, if you've never read anything by her, do yourself a favor and check her books out because they're amazing, she's funny, and she's just an absolute treasure. I wish more academics wrote the way that she does. And then finally, I picked up some books that I remember from childhood that I found quite by accident because my dog was with me and she wanted to like sniff the bottom of the bookshelves in the kids section, so I was curious what she was smelling, and it led me to some books that I really loved when I was a kid. The Castle in the Attic by Elizabeth Winthrop, and then there's apparently a sequel called The Battle for the Castle. I did not know that The Battle for the Castle existed as a child, and because the Femme Fatale readathon is coming up, which is where we read books by female fantasy authors, I was like, well, one of the challenges is to read a middle grade book. I already know that I love this one. I'm really curious to read the sequel and see what's going on here. So if I remember this correctly, this series is about a boy who has like a castle that is magic in his attic, and the little knight that lives inside of it comes to life, and the boy has to like go inside of the castle to help the knight out with his quest. Again, I read this when I was a pretty young kid, so I only really remember it in super broad strokes. I'm sure that because I want to read it for Femme Fatale, you'll hear about it when I wrap that up. But does anybody else ever have that happen where it's like, you remember, you have like a really good emotional memory of a book that you read as a kid without necessarily remembering the plot or any of the details? Like, there are some books where I still remember the plot because they're tied to the emotional memories, but books like this where it's like, oh, I remember I really enjoyed that, but what the heck even happened in that book? I don't really know. So that is it for the used books that I acquired recently. Have you read any of these? I am interested to hear what people's thoughts are about the stuff that I picked up because it really is kind of random and all over the place. And if you liked this video and you would like to see more like it, do not forget that I am on a quest to acquire 300 subscribers of you lovely folks by the end of the year, so you can subscribe to my channel and get updates every time I post. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!